Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1, Silent Erosion. Douglas Mercer always believed he was living the American dream. At 45, he owned a beautiful colonial house in the suburbs of Portland, Maine, had 2 children he adored, and had been married for 20 years to his college sweetheart, Vanessa. From the outside, everything appeared perfect, but appearances were deceiving. Douglas had built his construction company from nothing, working 16-hour days for years. The weathered calluses on his hands told a story his family had long stopped listening to. His business had thrived during the post-pandemic housing boom, allowing him to provide his family with everything they wanted. But despite his success, something had shifted in his home. On a cold Thursday morning in November, Douglas sat at the breakfast table, watching Vanessa scroll through her phone, occasionally smiling at messages he wasn't meant to see. "I've got that big project in Bar Harbor wrapping up today," Douglas said, stirring his coffee. "Should be home early tomorrow." Vanessa didn't look up. "That's nice." Their 17-year-old son Bradley sauntered in, grabbing a bagel without acknowledging his father. His daughter Melissa, 15, followed shortly after, earbuds firmly in place. "I was thinking we could do something this weekend as a family," Douglas suggested. "Maybe drive up to Acadia?" Bradley snorted. "Pass. Got plans with actual cool people. I need to be tagged in their Instagram posts, Dad," Melissa said with an eye roll. "Nobody's going to see me all the way in some national park." Douglas noticed the designer clothes they wore, clothes he had paid for, and felt a pang of something between sadness and resentment. When had his children become so shallow? When had they stopped seeing him as anything but an endless source of money? Later that day at the job site, Douglas's phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. "Don't bother rushing back tomorrow. Taking the kids to Portland for the weekend. Need space to think about us." That evening, as he walked through his empty house, Douglas noticed small signs he'd been too busy to see. Men's cologne lingering in their bedroom. A phone charger that wasn't his plugged into Vanessa's side of the bed. Credit card statements showing restaurant charges on nights she'd claimed to be having book club. In his home office, Douglas found himself staring at family photos that suddenly seemed like artifacts from another life. His fingers traced over his children's faces, remembering when they used to look at him with admiration instead of contempt. His office phone rang, his site foreman calling about a permit issue. As Douglas handled the crisis, he found an old flash drive in his desk drawer labeled insurance. Opening it revealed videos from their home security system that he'd saved years ago after a break-in scare, then forgotten about. Out of curiosity, he checked if the system was still backing up files. It was. What he found made his blood run cold. Footage from the previous month showed Vanessa bringing a man into their home, tall, with an expensive watch and a confident stride. Douglas recognized him as Nolan Pierce, a wealth manager who had started attending their neighborhood association meetings 6 months ago. The timestamp showed 2:14 p.m., when Douglas was always at work. More footage showed them in various rooms of the house, including the master bedroom. But what cut Douglas deepest was a clip from their kitchen, where Vanessa, Nolan, Bradley, and Melissa all sat around the island counter, laughing together like a family. "You really need to finalize the divorce papers," Nolan was saying, his arm draped casually around Vanessa's shoulders. "I've got connections who can make sure Douglas doesn't keep much. The business assets, the house, we can get it all." Vanessa smiled. "He's been so busy working. He hasn't even noticed I've been moving money out of our joint accounts for months." "Dad's clueless," Bradley laughed, holding up his new phone. "Thanks for this, by the way, Nolan. He's like your personal ATM," Melissa added, scrolling through her own phone. "But Nolan's, like, actually present. And successful." Douglas sat back in his chair, a strange calm washing over him. 20 years of marriage. 2 children he'd sacrificed everything for. And this was what it had come to, being erased and replaced while still paying all the bills. The man staring back at him in his desk mirror was a stranger, hollow-eyed and diminished. For a moment, he considered confronting Vanessa, fighting for his marriage. But then he rewound the footage and watched it again. No, this wasn't a marriage anymore. This was a conspiracy. Douglas closed his laptop and poured himself a whiskey. By morning, he had made a decision. If they wanted to take everything from him, they'd soon learn he wasn't the pushover they thought he was. As dawn broke, Douglas Mercer began making plans. Not to save his family, but to reclaim his dignity and exact a revenge so complete that they would regret ever taking him for granted. Chapter 2. The Basement Revelation. 3 weeks after discovering the footage, Douglas found himself in the basement at 3:12 a.m., ripping up soaked carpet that reeked of mold and rot. The washing machine had mysteriously overflowed earlier that day, flooding the finished basement where Bradley had his gaming setup. Douglas suspected Nolan's recent plumbing adjustments during a visit were responsible. He hadn't eaten in 19 hours, having worked a full day at a job site before coming home to this disaster. His hands were raw from the chemical cleaners, his back aching from hauling waterlogged furniture. But he worked methodically, silently, his mind processing everything he'd learned in the past weeks. Vanessa had withdrawn over $170,000 from their joint accounts in the past 6 months. Credit card statements revealed gifts for Nolan, expensive watches, weekend getaways disguised as work retreats. His children's social media showed them at restaurants and events with Nolan, posing like a happy family, while Douglas worked to pay for it all. The basement door opened, and Vanessa walked in with Bradley and Melissa. They'd been out at a late dinner with Nolan, coming home past midnight without explanation or apology. "You missed a spot." "Like always," Vanessa sneered, pointing to a corner where water still pooled. Douglas said nothing, continuing to cut away the ruined carpet. Bradley pulled out his phone, filming his father on his knees in the dirty water. "He's not a father. He's just an ATM with a pulse," he narrated for his TikTok followers. The red recording light glowed in the dim basement. Melissa high-fived her brother, leaning against the wall with a smirk. "Don't stop now," Vanessa said, examining her manicure. "We need the upstairs done before my boyfriend moves in tomorrow." Douglas froze momentarily, then continued cutting the carpet. So they were finally making it official. "What, nothing to say?" Vanessa pushed. "Nolan's making me happier than you ever did. The divorce papers are on your desk. Sign them. He's got big plans for this place. Thinking of converting your workshop into a home gym." Douglas stood slowly, his knees cracking from hours on the concrete floor. He turned to face his family, seeing them clearly for the first time in years. 3 strangers wearing familiar faces, watching him with contempt. "I'll be done by morning," he said quietly, his voice devoid of emotion. After they left, laughing as they climbed the stairs, Douglas pulled out his phone and pressed record, capturing the entire basement as evidence. Then he opened the tiny workroom behind the furnace that Vanessa had always ignored. Inside was a small desk with a laptop he'd set up weeks ago. Douglas had been busy. He'd installed new security cameras throughout the house, ones that Vanessa, Bradley, and Melissa didn't know about. He'd recorded countless conversations, Vanessa and Nolan discussing how to pressure him into signing over assets, his children mocking him behind his back, plans to redecorate once he was out of the picture. He'd also been systematically documenting the money trail. While Vanessa thought she was being clever, Douglas had been tracking every penny. He'd hired a private investigator named Ray Drummond, an old high school friend who'd fallen on hard times until Douglas helped him get back on his feet. Ray had been gathering information on Nolan Pierce that painted a very different picture than the successful wealth manager he pretended to be. Douglas worked through the night, finishing the basement cleanup just as dawn broke. He showered, dressed in his best suit, and packed a small bag. Before leaving, he placed a single envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside was not a signed divorce agreement, but a note that read, "Taking some time to think. Back in a week." By the time Vanessa and the kids woke up, Douglas Mercer was gone. Chapter 3. The Architect of Pain. Douglas checked into the Harbor View Hotel under the name David Miller, paying cash. From the window of his 5th-floor room, he could see the Atlantic stretching endlessly before him. For the first time in years, he felt truly clear-headed. His phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. "Where are you? You need to sign these papers now. Nolan's movers are coming Friday." He ignored it, instead calling Ray Drummond. "Got what you asked for," Ray said in his gravelly voice. "Nolan Pierce isn't who he says he is. Real name's Neil Pritchard. He's run this game in 3 other states, seduces wealthy married women, helps them clean out their husbands, then disappears with the money once the divorce is final. Never stays longer than 8 months. And the business background? Completely fabricated. The wealth management firm he claims to work for doesn't exist, just a convincing website and some fake testimonials. He's good, though. Creates enough of a paper trail to be convincing. Douglas nodded, unsurprised. And my kids? Ray's voice softened. They don't know they're being played. To them, he's just the cool guy who buys them stuff and doesn't make them follow rules. Bradley's been skipping school, and Melissa's grades have tanked. Vanessa doesn't seem to notice or care. What about the other women? Can you get me in touch with them? Already working on it. Found 2 so far who are willing to talk. Douglas ended the call and turned to his laptop. He'd spent years building his construction business, developing a network of contacts in every sector of Portland's economy and government. Now, he would leverage those connections for a different kind of project. First, he contacted Elaine Winters, a bank manager who owed him for renovating her lake house at cost when she was going through a divorce of her own. I need to protect my assets without looking like I'm hiding anything, Douglas explained. And I need information on some questionable transactions. Next, he called Thomas Grunwald, a retired detective and current head of security for one of Douglas's commercial clients. I've got evidence of identity fraud and potential conspiracy, Douglas said. But I need more leverage before I go to the authorities. Finally, he reached out to his oldest friend, Sophia Baker, a family lawyer who'd been warning him about Vanessa for years. You were right, he admitted. And now I need your help to make sure I don't lose everything. Over the next 3 days, Douglas methodically built his plan. He wasn't interested in simple divorce proceedings or quick revenge. He wanted to dismantle the entire conspiracy piece by piece, leaving nothing but rubble where his betrayers stood. He created spreadsheets tracking every asset, every dollar that Vanessa had moved. He studied the pattern of Nolan's previous cons. He reviewed every conversation, every video of his children's betrayal. On the 4th day, Douglas received an email from Maya Cortez, one of Nolan's previous victims in Arizona. He took everything. My house, my savings, even turned my daughter against me. By the time I realized what was happening, he'd vanished with $340,000. The police said it was a civil matter since I'd willingly transferred the funds. If you can stop him, I'll help however I can. Douglas stared at the photos she'd attached. A woman with the same hollow look he'd seen in his own mirror, standing outside what was once her home. This wasn't just about his family anymore. It was about justice. On the 5th day, Douglas received a panicked call from Vanessa. The bank froze our accounts. They're saying there's suspicious activity. What did you do? Nothing, Douglas replied calmly. Maybe you should ask your boyfriend. This isn't funny, Douglas. Nolan says we need to finalize everything immediately. You need to come home and sign these papers. I'll be home tomorrow, Douglas said. We'll talk then. That night, as he packed his bag, Douglas looked at himself in the hotel mirror. The defeated man from the basement was gone. In his place stood someone harder, colder, more calculating. His phone buzzed with a text from Bradley. Dad, where are you? Mom's freaking out. That new truck you promised me isn't going to buy itself. Not a word of concern. Just another demand. Douglas didn't reply. Let them wonder. Let them worry. Tomorrow, the games would begin. Chapter 4, The Return. When Douglas pulled into the driveway of his home at precisely 7 p.m., he found Nolan's sleek black Tesla already parked there. Perfect. He wanted everyone present for what was about to happen. He entered without knocking. It was still his house, after all. In the living room, Vanessa, Nolan, Bradley, and Melissa sat around the coffee table like a war council interrupted. Papers were spread across the surface. The divorce agreement, he presumed. Douglas. Vanessa stood, her voice artificially sweet. You had us worried. I doubt that, Douglas replied, setting his bag down. He nodded to Nolan. I see you've made yourself at home, Mr. Pierce. Or should I say Pritchard? The flash of alarm in Nolan's eyes confirmed everything. I don't know what you're talking about. Nolan recovered quickly, extending his hand. Good to finally meet you properly. Vanessa has told me so much. Douglas ignored the outstretched hand. I'm sure she has. Like how much money is in our accounts. Or which assets would be easiest to liquidate. Dad, stop being weird. Melissa groaned, not looking up from her phone. Yeah, just sign the papers so we can all move on, Bradley added, gesturing to the documents. Nolan's got connections who can get me an internship at a hedge fund next summer. Douglas smiled coldly. I'm afraid there's been a change of plans. He pulled out his own folder and dropped it on the coffee table. The accounts are frozen pending an investigation into unusual activity. My name has been removed from all credit cards. And the house, he looked directly at Vanessa, isn't actually in our names anymore. What are you talking about? Vanessa snatched up the folder. Her face drained of color as she read. This says the house is owned by Mercer Family Trust? What did you do? Estate planning, Douglas shrugged. About 3 years ago, remember? You were too busy with your book club to attend the meeting with our financial advisor, so you signed the papers without reading them. The house, the vacation property, even most of the business assets are in a trust one control. Nolan's composure slipped. That can't be legal. It's completely legal, Douglas assured him. Vanessa agreed to it. There are witnesses, notarized documents. You can sue, of course, but that would take years. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The carefully orchestrated plan to strip Douglas of everything was crumbling before their eyes. Bradley stood, anger flashing across his face. You can't do this. We live here too. You certainly do, Douglas agreed. And you can continue to do so, under my roof, by my rules. Or you can leave with your mother and Mr. Pritchard here, to whatever accommodations they can afford now. Vanessa's eyes narrowed. This isn't over, Douglas. You think you're so clever, but... Oh, I'm not finished, Douglas interrupted. He pulled out his phone and played a recording. Vanessa and Nolan discussing how to pressure Douglas into signing over his business assets. Once we've cleaned him out, we can move to California, Nolan was saying on the recording. These kinds of men always break. They're so desperate to believe their wives still love them. Douglas stopped the playback. I have hours of these. Plus evidence of the money you've been moving, Vanessa. And some very interesting information about Mr. Pritchard's activities in Arizona, Colorado, and Washington state. Nolan shot to his feet. You're bluffing. Douglas smiled. Maya Cortez sends her regards. The color drained from Nolan's face at the mention of his previous victim. Here's what's going to happen, Douglas continued calmly. Nolan will return every dollar Vanessa gave him. Vanessa will move out of the master bedroom immediately. The guest room is prepared for you. As for the divorce, we'll proceed, but on my terms. And if we refuse? Vanessa challenged, though her voice lacked conviction. Then tomorrow morning, I send my evidence to the police, the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit, and the State Licensing Board. I believe fraud across state lines is a federal offense. Douglas turned to his children. And you too. Your allowances are canceled. Your credit cards are deactivated. You want money? Get jobs. Bradley laughed incredulously. You're joking. Try using your card, Douglas suggested. Bradley pulled out his wallet, grabbing his phone to check his banking app. His face fell. What the hell? My account's empty. I've moved your college funds into accounts only I can access, Douglas explained. You'll get them back when you demonstrate responsibility and respect. This is abuse. Melissa shouted, tears forming in her eyes. No, Douglas corrected her. This is consequence. Something you've never experienced. He turned to leave the room, then paused. Dinner's at 7:30. Anyone who wants to eat under my roof will be at the table, without phones. We have a lot to discuss about the new household rules. As Douglas headed upstairs to unpack, chaos erupted behind him. Vanessa was shouting at Nolan, who was already edging toward the door. Bradley was frantically calling his friends, discovering his phone plan had been downgraded to basics. No data, no frills. Melissa was in tears, realizing her social media accounts had mysteriously been logged out on all devices. In the master bedroom, Douglas changed into casual clothes, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. Phase 1 was complete. Now came the harder part, rebuilding what could be salvaged and demolishing what couldn't. He had given them a choice. Now he would see what they would choose. Chapter 5, The Unraveling. The next morning, Douglas woke at his usual 5:30 a.m. The house was silent. No one had attended his mandated family dinner the night before. He'd eaten alone, savoring the quiet and the first steps of his plan coming together. In the kitchen, he found evidence of a hurried meal. Dishes in the sink, bread left out. Typical. They took, consumed, and left messes for others to clean up. Not anymore. Douglas made his coffee and checked his surveillance app. The cameras had captured Nolan sneaking out around midnight, carrying 2 suitcases to his Tesla. Vanessa had followed him outside in tears, but Nolan had driven away without a backward glance. A text message from Ray confirmed that Nolan had checked into the Portland Harbor Hotel using a different credit card, one registered to another woman in Bangor. As Douglas sipped his coffee, Bradley stumbled into the kitchen, bleary-eyed and clearly hungover. "Where's the aspirin?" he mumbled, not making eye contact. "Medicine cabinet, bathroom," Douglas replied calmly. "Late night." Bradley ignored the question, rummaging through cabinets until Douglas pointed him in the right direction. When he returned, Douglas pushed a piece of paper across the counter. "What's this?" Bradley asked suspiciously. "Your schedule. You start working at my job site today. 7 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. You'll be helping Louise with basic labor, carrying supplies, cleaning up, learning how real work is done." Bradley laughed. "Yeah, right. I'm not doing construction. I've got plans with." "Then you've got 30 minutes to pack your essentials and leave," Douglas interrupted. "You're 18, legally an adult. I've supported you while you've mocked me behind my back and to my face. That ends today. You can't just kick me out." "I can. And I will. Your choice. Work and live here under my rules, or leave and figure it out on your own. Nolan's gone, by the way. Think he'll take you in." Bradley's face cycled through shock, anger, and finally, uncertainty. "Mom won't let you do this. Your mother spent the night calling Nolan, who isn't answering. She's in no position to make demands." Douglas checked his watch. 28 minutes now. For the first time in years, Douglas saw a crack in his son's arrogant facade. The fear of an entitled child suddenly facing real-world consequences. Bradley stormed out, slamming doors as he went upstairs. 30 minutes later, he reappeared wearing work boots Douglas didn't know he owned and a scowl. "This is bullshit," he muttered. "Probably," Douglas agreed, standing. "But it's necessary bullshit. Let's go." At the construction site, Douglas introduced Bradley to Luis, his foreman of 15 years. "Your boy finally coming to learn the business?" Luis asked, surprise evident in his voice. "He's here to learn something, anyway," Douglas replied. "Start him with cleanup and basics. Don't go easy on him because he's my son." Luis nodded, understanding the subtext. "Got it, boss." By noon, Vanessa had called 14 times. Douglas finally answered while inspecting a foundation pour. "Where's Bradley?" she demanded. "Working. Learning value. I want him home now." "And what did you do to Melissa's social media?" "She's hysterical. I had all her accounts temporarily suspended," Douglas explained. "She can have them back when she starts behaving like a decent human being. As for you, I expect the guest room to be set up properly by the time I get home. You'll also need to return the jewelry you bought with my credit card last month." "Or what?" Vanessa challenged. "Or tomorrow. I file a police report about the money you've been funneling to Nolan. I've already spoken to the detective handling Nolan's previous fraud cases." The line went silent for a moment. "You're not the man I married," Vanessa finally said, her voice unsteady. "No," Douglas agreed. "That man was a fool who trusted people who saw him as nothing but a resource to exploit. You should be grateful I'm offering terms at all." After hanging up, Douglas received a call from Sophia, his lawyer friend. "Nolan Pierce is on the move," she reported. "Used his credit card in Portsmouth this morning. Looks like he's running back to Boston." "Not surprised," Douglas replied. "He knows the game is up here." "What about the money?" "The bank found transfers totaling $63,000 to an account in his name in the past month alone. They're building a case." "Good. And the other matter?" "Your revised divorce terms are ready. Given the evidence of financial misconduct, Vanessa will get far less than she hoped. The judge I've spoken with informally was unimpressed by her behavior." By the time Douglas returned home with a silent, exhausted Bradley, the house had a different energy. Melissa sat at the dining room table, actually doing homework. Vanessa was in the kitchen, awkwardly attempting to prepare dinner. "We need to talk," she said to Douglas, her voice missing its usual edge. "After dinner," Douglas replied, washing his hands at the sink. "Bradley, shower, then come down to eat." For the first time in years, all four of them sat at the table together. The conversation was stilted, the atmosphere tense, but it was a start. Douglas observed his family, Vanessa stealing uncertain glances at him, Bradley too tired to maintain his surly attitude, Melissa occasionally checking her wrist where her Apple Watch used to be. After dinner, Douglas met with Vanessa in his office. "Nolan's gone," she admitted immediately. "He won't answer my calls." "Of course not," Douglas said, leaning back in his chair. "He's already targeting his next victim in Boston. The FBI is tracking him now." Vanessa's eyes widened. "The FBI? He's crossed state lines multiple times committing fraud. It was just a matter of connecting the dots. Douglas slid a folder across the desk. These are my terms for the divorce. You get enough to start over, but not the windfall you planned on. The house stays with me and any children who choose to live here. Vanessa opened the folder with trembling hands. This is, she began, then stopped. Even in her entitled state, she knew the terms were more generous than she deserved. It's fair, Douglas finished for her. More than fair, given what you've done. And if I fight it, then I hold nothing back. Every recording, every document showing how you conspired to rob me blind goes to the authorities and our friends. Your choice. Vanessa stared at the papers for a long moment. I did love you once, she said quietly. Perhaps, Douglas acknowledged. But love without respect isn't love at all. He stood, signaling the end of the conversation. You have until tomorrow to decide. As Vanessa left, Douglas checked his phone. A text from Ray showed Nolan checking into a Boston hotel, where 2 FBI agents were waiting to question him about Maya Cortez's case. Phase 2 was proceeding exactly as planned. Chapter 6, The Revelation. 3 weeks after Douglas's return, the household had settled into an uneasy routine. Vanessa had signed the divorce papers and was preparing to move into a modest apartment. Bradley continued working at the construction site, his attitude slowly shifting from resentment to grudging engagement. Melissa had earned back limited social media privileges by improving her grades and actually participating in family dinners. On a cold December evening, Douglas received an unexpected visitor, Detective Abigail Santos from the Financial Crimes Division. Mr. Mercer, she said as Douglas invited her into his office. We need to discuss Neil Pritchard, also known as Nolan Pierce. I've provided everything I have, Douglas assured her. What more do you need? Detective Santos placed a file on his desk. It's not what we need, but what you should know. Pritchard wasn't just running a romance scam. He was part of a larger network targeting successful business owners, particularly in construction and real estate. Douglas leaned forward. I don't understand. Your wife wasn't his primary target, Mr. Mercer. You were. She opened the file, revealing surveillance photos of Nolan meeting with several men Douglas recognized, competitors, suppliers, even a city building inspector he'd had trouble with. He was gathering information about your business practices, looking for weaknesses or irregularities he could exploit. Douglas felt the floor tilt beneath him. Are you saying he pursued Vanessa to get to me? Initially, yes. Based on our investigation, his organization identified you as a potential target 8 months ago. Your wife was the access point. Santos pointed to a timeline in the file. But then he discovered something that changed his approach. What? Your business was clean. No shortcuts, no bribes, nothing they could use against you. That's when he shifted to Plan B, the divorce strategy. If he couldn't blackmail you, he'd help your wife take half your assets. Douglas sat back, processing this information. Who's behind this organization? Santos hesitated. We don't have all the pieces yet, but it appears to be orchestrated by someone called the broker, a person who matches con artists with potential victims and takes a percentage of the proceeds. And you think this broker targeted me specifically? What? That's what's interesting, Santos replied. According to Pritchard, who's now cooperating to reduce his sentence, you were on a list of targets provided by someone with a personal vendetta against you. Douglas's mind raced through possibilities. He'd made enemies over the years, certainly. Competitors he'd outbid, workers he'd fired for cutting corners, clients who felt their projects should have cost less. Do you have a name? Santos shook her head. Not yet. Pritchard never met them directly. But we do know they provided detailed information about your routines, your marriage, even the security system in your home. After the detective left, Douglas sat in his office for hours, reviewing mental lists of everyone who might harbor enough resentment to orchestrate such an elaborate scheme. The revelation that Vanessa hadn't simply fallen for another man, but had been deliberately targeted as part of a larger conspiracy against him changed everything. The next morning, he gathered Vanessa, Bradley, and Melissa in the living room. There's something you all need to know, he began, explaining what Detective Santos had revealed. He watched their reactions carefully. Bradley's shock seemed genuine, as did Melissa's distress. Vanessa, however, showed less surprise than he expected. You knew, Douglas realized, studying her face. You knew he was targeting me. Vanessa looked away. Not at first. He was charming, attentive, everything you hadn't been for years. But after a few months, he started asking questions about your business, your clients. When I seemed hesitant, he suggested I deserved more from our marriage, that you were probably hiding assets. And you believed him. I wanted to, Vanessa admitted. It was easier than accepting that our marriage had failed because we'd both stopped trying. Douglas turned to his children. And you too? Did Nolan ever ask about my business, my schedule, my finances? Bradley shifted uncomfortably. He would ask stuff sometimes. Like who visited the house when you were gone, where you kept important documents. I thought he was just making conversation. He had me install an app on my phone, Melissa said quietly. Said it was to help with my homework, but it needed access to the home Wi-Fi. Douglas nodded, the pieces falling into place. They had all been manipulated, used as pawns in someone else's game. But that didn't excuse their behavior, their willingness to betray him. I need to find out who's behind this, Douglas said. And why they're coming after me specifically. What does this mean for us? Vanessa asked, gesturing between them. For the divorce? Douglas considered her question. The divorce proceeds as planned. Whatever we once had is broken beyond repair. But we have a common enemy now, someone who used all of us. I need to know if any of you are willing to help me find them. The silence that followed was heavy with the weight of broken trust and uncertain futures. Finally, Bradley spoke up. I'm in, he said simply. I owe you that much. Melissa nodded her agreement, tears in her eyes. Vanessa hesitated, then met Douglas's gaze directly for the first time in months. Tell me what you need. Douglas realized this wasn't forgiveness. He would never fully trust them again. But it was something else, something unexpected. A chance to uncover the truth together before they went their separate ways. That night, as he reviewed security footage from before Nolan's arrival in their lives, Douglas spotted something he'd missed. A familiar face at their neighborhood block party 6 months earlier. The same face he'd seen in Detective Santos's file, identified as a known associate of the broker. His phone rang. It was Ray Drummond. Douglas, you need to see this. I found a connection between Nolan and someone from your past. Someone with a serious grudge. Who? Douglas demanded. Lawrence Shepard. The name hit Douglas like a physical blow. Lawrence Shepard, his former business partner, the man who'd tried to cut corners on a major project 7 years ago, endangering workers' lives. The man Douglas had reported to the authorities, resulting in fines and a revoked contractor's license. The man who'd threatened Douglas in court. You've taken everything from me. Someday, I'll return the favor. Are you sure? Douglas asked, though he already knew the answer. Positive. Phone records show multiple calls between Shepard and numbers associated with Nolan's operation. And get this, Shepard was released from prison 4 months before Nolan showed up in Portland. Douglas hung up and stared at the ceiling, the full scope of the conspiracy finally clear. This hadn't been random bad luck or a failing marriage. This had been a calculated plan years in the making, a plan that had almost succeeded. He thought about the family that had nearly been destroyed, not just by their own selfishness, but by the manipulation of someone exploiting their weaknesses. He thought about Lawrence Shepard, patiently plotting revenge from a prison cell. Douglas Mercer had survived the attack on his life, his business, his family. Now it was time to finish this once and for all. Chapter 7. The Hunter. Lawrence Shepard lived in a rented waterfront condo in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, close enough to monitor his revenge plot in Portland, but far enough to maintain distance. The property was registered to a shell company, but Ray's investigative skills had traced the paper trail back to Shepard himself. On a frigid January morning, Douglas parked across the street from the luxury building, watching as Shepard emerged for his daily coffee run. 7 years had changed him. Prison had hardened his once soft features, and his previously dark hair was now streaked with gray. But Douglas would have recognized him anywhere. For 3 days, Douglas observed Shepard's routines, using the surveillance skills he'd honed while monitoring his own family. He documented Shepard's visitors, including 2 men identified in Detective Santos's file as known associates of the broker network. He photographed Shepard meeting with a woman who bore a striking resemblance to Vanessa, clearly scouting his next mark for a similar scheme. On the 4th day, Douglas received a call from Bradley. Dad, I found something. I was going through old photos from last summer, and there's one from that fishing trip we took to Lake Sebago. There's a boat in the background with 2 men in it. One of them is Nolan. And the other? Douglas asked, though he suspected the answer. I didn't recognize him, but I ran the image through that facial recognition app Melissa uses for her Instagram. It's some guy named Lawrence Shepard. Mean anything to you? More than you know, Douglas replied. Text me the photo. And Bradley, good work. The photo confirmed what Douglas had already pieced together. Shepard had been monitoring him and his family for months before the plan was set in motion. The fishing trip had been in May, 2 months before Nolan appeared at their neighborhood association meeting. That evening, Douglas met with Detective Santos at a quiet diner outside Portland. I have proof connecting Shepard to Pritchard and the fraud scheme, Douglas explained, sliding over a folder containing his surveillance photos and Bradley's fishing trip discovery. Santos reviewed the evidence. This helps, but Shepard is careful. He maintains just enough distance to claim he's not involved. We need something more concrete, financial records, direct communications. I might have an idea, Douglas said, but I'll need your cooperation. The plan came together over the next week. Vanessa, seeking some form of redemption, agreed to contact Nolan under the pretense that she had accessed additional funds from Douglas's accounts. The conversation was recorded with Detective Santos present, and Nolan, desperate for a deal to reduce his sentence, implicated Shepard directly. Lawrence picked your husband specifically, Nolan explained in the recorded call. Said Douglas Mercer had destroyed his life and needed to feel the same pain. He provided everything, floor plans of your house, Douglas's work schedule, even which approach would work best with you and the kids. With that evidence, combined with financial records showing payments from Shepard's shell company to Nolan's accounts, Detective Santos secured a warrant for Shepard's arrest. But when police arrived at his Portsmouth condo, Shepard was gone. A neighbor reported seeing him leave with suitcases the previous evening. He must have been tipped off, Santos told Douglas. We've issued an alert, but he could be anywhere by now. Douglas knew better. Lawrence Shepard wouldn't run, not when he was so close to witnessing Douglas's downfall. He would stay nearby, watching, waiting to savor the results of his plan. And Douglas knew exactly where to find him. 7 years earlier, during their partnership, Shepard had purchased a hunting cabin in the White Mountains of New Hampshire, a property he'd kept off the books, paid for in cash. Douglas had helped him renovate it, installing the electrical system himself. It was their secret retreat, a place to close deals away from prying eyes. After their falling out, Douglas had assumed Shepard sold it. I know where he is, Douglas told Santos. But by the time you get a warrant for that location, he could be gone. I need to handle this my way. Douglas, don't do anything stupid, Santos warned. Let the authorities handle this. But Douglas had already decided. After 7 years of watching his partner cut corners that endangered lives, after months of having his family turned against him, after nearly losing everything to a revenge plot, Douglas Mercer was done waiting for others to deliver justice. The next morning, he drove the 3 hours to the remote cabin, parking his truck a mile away and approaching on foot through the dense forest. From the tree line, he could see smoke rising from the chimney. Shepard's black SUV was parked outside. Douglas circled the property, noting the new security cameras Shepard had installed. Using the knowledge of the cabin's layout, he located the blind spot, the small back window to the utility room, where the electrical panel he'd installed years ago was housed. As dusk fell, Douglas made his move, disabling the power just long enough to slip inside, while the security system rebooted. He found Shepard in the main room, frantically checking his laptop by flashlight. Hello, Lawrence, Douglas said calmly, emerging from the shadows. Been a while. Shepard spun around, his face contorting with shock, and then hatred. How did you find me? You're predictable, Douglas replied. Always were. Cut corners on the job, cut corners in life. This cabin was your only real secret. Shepard's hand moved toward a drawer, but Douglas was faster, crossing the room in 2 strides and slamming Shepard's arm against the table. Don't, Douglas warned. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to understand why. Why go to all this trouble? 7 years is a long time to hold a grudge. Shepard laughed bitterly. You want to know why? You destroyed everything I built. My business, my reputation, my marriage, all gone because you couldn't keep your mouth shut about a few building code violations. Those violations could have killed people, Lawrence. And what about my life? Shepard shouted. What about my family? My wife left me while I was in prison. My kids won't speak to me. I lost my house, my savings. Everything. His eyes blazed with a hatred that had been festering for years. I wanted you to feel that same loss. To know what it's like when everything you love is taken away. Douglas studied the man before him. This hollow shell consumed by revenge. The difference is, I didn't bring it on myself. You did. Those were your choices, your shortcuts, your greed. So self-righteous, Shepard sneered. Did your wife tell you how easy it was to turn her against you? How readily your children mocked you behind your back? They were waiting for permission to betray you, Douglas. I just gave them the opportunity. The words stung because there was truth in them. Douglas's family had been vulnerable to manipulation because the foundation was already cracked. You're right about one thing, Douglas acknowledged. My family was broken. But not anymore. He pulled out his phone, showing Shepard a live feed from Detective Santos's body cam as she and a tactical team approached the cabin. They're helping me now. Shepard lunged for the back door, but Douglas blocked his path. It's over, Lawrence. The police know everything. About Nolan, about the scheme, about all of it. You'll go back to prison, but this time for much longer. As the sounds of police officers surrounding the cabin filled the air, Shepard's face crumpled. You've always been so perfect, haven't you? Douglas Mercer, the honest businessman, the family man. Not perfect, Douglas corrected him. Just unwilling to compromise on what matters most. When Detective Santos entered the cabin minutes later, she found Douglas sitting calmly across from a defeated Lawrence Shepard. Mr. Shepard, she announced, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, criminal harassment, and violation of parole. As the officers led Shepard away, he turned to Douglas one last time. This doesn't fix your family, you know. They still betrayed you. They'll do it again. Douglas watched his former partner being placed in a police car. Maybe, he replied quietly. But that's for me to decide now, not you. Chapter 8. The Verdict. 6 months after Lawrence Shepard's arrest, Douglas sat in a Portland courtroom, watching as the judge prepared to deliver the sentence. The trial had been exhaustive, with evidence from multiple states showing the extent of Shepard's revenge conspiracy. Bradley sat beside Douglas, dressed in a suit and tie, a far cry from the entitled teenager of months past. Melissa sat on his other side, her hand occasionally reaching for her father's in a gesture of solidarity that would have been unimaginable half a year earlier. Vanessa was there too, seated a few rows back. Their divorce had been finalized 3 months ago, but they had maintained a civil relationship for the sake of the children and the conclusion of this case. The defendant will rise, the judge announced. Lawrence Shepard stood, flanked by his attorneys. The once imposing man now looked diminished in his ill-fitting suit, the months in pretrial detention having taken their toll. Lawrence Shepard, this court finds your actions particularly disturbing, the judge began. You orchestrated an elaborate scheme of revenge that victimized not only your intended target, but innocent family members as well. You recruited others into your conspiracy, creating a network of fraud that spanned multiple states and caused harm to numerous families. Douglas listened as the judge detailed the charges: conspiracy to commit fraud, criminal harassment, identity theft, money laundering, and violation of parole. The list was extensive, the evidence overwhelming. Having considered all factors, including your prior conviction and the calculated nature of these crimes, I hereby sentence you to 15 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole for the first 10 years. The gavel struck with finality, and Shepard was led away. As he passed Douglas, their eyes met briefly. Shepard still burning with hatred, Douglas's calm and resolved. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered around Douglas and his family. Mr. Mercer, how do you feel about the sentence? One called out. Justice was served, Douglas replied simply. Now my family and I can move forward. Will you be rebuilding your relationship with your ex-wife? Another asked, gesturing to Vanessa, who stood apart from the group. Douglas shook his head. Some bridges can't be rebuilt once they're burned. But we found a way to co-parent respectfully. As the reporters dispersed, Ray Drummond approached, clapping Douglas on the shoulder. It's really over now, my friend. The legal part, yes, Douglas agreed. The rest takes longer. Later that evening, Douglas hosted a small gathering at his home. Ray, Sophia, Detective Santos, and a few loyal friends who'd stood by him throughout the ordeal. Bradley and Melissa were there too. Bradley having moved back home after genuinely embracing his work at the construction company. Melissa staying with Douglas during the school week while spending weekends with Vanessa. As conversations flowed around him, Douglas stepped onto the back deck for a moment of solitude. The summer air was warm, the stars clear above Portland Harbor. Thomas Grunwald, the retired detective who had helped Douglas gather evidence, joined him. "Penny for your thoughts," Thomas offered. Douglas smiled faintly, just reflecting on how quickly life can change. "A year ago, I was ripping up moldy carpet in my basement while my family mocked me. Now here we are." "You did what few men could," Thomas observed. "You didn't just survive the attack, you turned it around completely. Most would have crumbled." "I almost did," Douglas admitted. "There were moments. But you didn't. That's what matters." Thomas studied his friend's face. "The question is, where do you go from here? Your business is thriving, Shepard is in prison, your kids are finding their way back. But what about you, Douglas? What do you want for yourself now?" It was a question Douglas had been avoiding. For months, his focus had been singular: truth, justice, rebuilding what could be salvaged. Now that those goals had been largely achieved, he found himself at a crossroads. "I'm not sure," he answered honestly. "I never expected to start over at 46. "It's not starting over," Thomas corrected. "It's continuing with better information." Inside, Bradley was laughing with Ray about something, the sound carrying through the open door. Melissa was showing Sophia photos on her phone, their heads bent together in comfortable camaraderie. "Your children have changed," Thomas noted. "Especially Bradley." "We all have," Douglas replied. "What happened?" "It forced a kind of reckoning. They learned some hard lessons about actions and consequences." "And forgiveness?" Douglas considered the question carefully. "No," he said finally. "Not forgiveness. Understanding, maybe. Acceptance of what happened and what can't be undone. But some betrayals leave permanent marks." Thomas nodded, respecting the honesty of the answer. "Fair enough. You don't owe anyone forgiveness, Douglas. You've been more than generous with second chances as it is." From inside, Bradley called out, "Dad, come see this presentation we put together for the East Side Project." Douglas smiled at Thomas. "Duty calls." As they turned to go inside, he added, "You know what's strange? In trying to destroy me, Shepard actually forced me to rebuild something stronger. My relationship with my kids isn't perfect, but it's more honest than it's been in years." "Life's funny that way," Thomas agreed. "Sometimes you need everything to fall apart before you can see what matters." Douglas rejoined the gathering, watching as Bradley confidently walked through a presentation for a new construction project, a youth center in Portland's underserved East Side. The boy who had once mockingly filmed his father cleaning a flooded basement was now discussing community impact and sustainable building practices with genuine enthusiasm. As the evening wound down and guests departed, Douglas found himself alone with his children. "That went well," he said, clearing the last of the glasses from the coffee table. Bradley nodded. "Mr. Grunwald said the youth center could be our signature project. Something that shows what Mercer Construction stands for." "Our signature project?" Douglas repeated, catching the pronoun. Bradley looked slightly embarrassed. "Well, yeah. I mean, if you're still thinking I could learn the business. For real this time." "I'd like that," Douglas said simply. Melissa, who had been quiet, finally spoke up. "Dad, I know we can't fix everything that happened, but I want you to know I'm sorry. For how I treated you, for the things I said." Douglas regarded his daughter thoughtfully. "Actions speak louder than words, Melissa. Just keep showing me who you really are, day by day. That's all I ask." She nodded, understanding the boundary he'd established, not rejection, but a requirement to earn trust rather than expect instant forgiveness. As they said their goodnights, Douglas returned to the deck, looking out over the city lights. His phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. The kids seemed happy tonight. "You're doing a good job with them." He considered not responding, then typed back, "They're making their own choices now. Better ones." A year ago, his family had stood in a flooded basement, laughing as they told him his replacement would soon be moving in. They had seen him as nothing but a resource to exploit, a punchline to mock. Now, Lawrence Shepard was in prison. Nolan Pierce was facing charges in 3 states. Vanessa was rebuilding her life separately, without the windfall she'd schemed for. And his children were slowly earning back his trust. Douglas Mercer hadn't forgiven. He wouldn't forget. But he had reclaimed what mattered most: his dignity, his business, his sense of self. And in doing so, he had become something his betrayers never expected, not a victim, but a force to be reckoned with. The forgotten man had made himself unforgettable, Chapter 9. The Forgotten Man. 1 year to the day after that night in the basement, Douglas stood on the roof of the newly completed youth center, surveying the Portland skyline. The bitter January wind cut through his coat, but he hardly noticed, focused instead on the sense of accomplishment that warmed him from within. "Beautiful view," said a voice behind him. Bradley approached, handing his father a cup of coffee from the thermos he carried. At 19, he had grown into his shoulders, the physical labor of the past year having transformed him from a soft, entitled boy into a young man who understood the value of work. "Worth all the permit battles," Douglas agreed, accepting the coffee. "Mom's downstairs," Bradley said after a moment. "She came for the ribbon cutting." Douglas nodded, unsurprised. Despite their divorce, Vanessa had been making efforts to support their children's activities, though she and Douglas rarely spoke directly. "She's dating that accountant from her firm," Bradley continued. "Seems happy. Different. Good for her," Douglas replied, meaning it. The anger had faded, replaced by indifference. Vanessa's life was her own now, separate from his except where their children were concerned. "Hard to believe it's been a year," Bradley said, looking out over the city. "Sometimes I still can't believe how we treated you." Douglas studied his son's profile, noting the genuine regret there. "We've all moved forward, Bradley. That's what matters." Below them, people were gathering for the youth center's opening ceremony. The project had become a point of pride for Mercer Construction, built partially with donated materials and reduced fees, designed to provide a safe space for at-risk teenagers in Portland's East Side. It had also become a symbol of Douglas's personal transformation. "Should we head down?" Bradley asked. Douglas nodded, and they made their way to the ground floor where a crowd had assembled, city officials, donors, community members, and the media. Melissa was already there, helping to organize the attendees. At 16, she'd found her own way to contribute, volunteering with the Youth Center's arts program. As Douglas prepared to address the gathering, he spotted Vanessa at the back of the crowd. Their eyes met briefly, acknowledging each other's presence without warmth or animosity. Beside her stood a tall man with glasses, the accountant, presumably. "Thank you all for coming today," Douglas began. "The East Portland Youth Center represents more than just a building. It represents second chances and new beginnings." As he spoke about the center's mission, Douglas reflected on his own journey over the past year. After Shepard's sentencing, he had channeled his energy into rebuilding, not just his family relationships, but his connection to the community. The youth center had been born from a conversation with Bradley, who had suggested that teenagers needed a place where they could feel valued and heard. "Sometimes in life, we find ourselves at the bottom," Douglas continued. "In a basement, metaphorically speaking. It's what we do in those moments that defines us. Do we stay down, or do we find the strength to rise?" From the back of the room, Vanessa slipped out early, her departure unnoticed by most. Douglas registered it without emotion, another small reminder that their chapter was closed. After the ceremony, as community members toured the facility, Ray Drummond approached Douglas with a tablet. "Thought you might want to see this," Ray said, handing him the device. On the screen was a news article from Arizona, the broker network dismantled, multi-state fraud operation taken down. The article detailed how the investigation that had begun with Nolan Pierce and Lawrence Shepard had expanded, leading to the arrest of 12 individuals involved in a sophisticated fraud ring targeting successful business owners across the country. Photos showed several perpetrators being led away in handcuffs. "Detective Santos called this morning," Ray added. "Said this all started because you refused to be a victim. Said you should be proud." Douglas handed the tablet back, a sense of closure washing over him. "It's over then. Really over." That evening, after the excitement had died down, Douglas hosted a small dinner at his home. Bradley and Melissa were there, along with Ray, Sophia, and Thomas. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and the occasional serious discussion about next steps for the business. "So what's next for Douglas Mercer?" Sophia asked as they finished dessert. "The business is thriving, the youth center is open, the bad guys are in jail. What's your next mountain to climb?" Douglas smiled. "Actually, I've been thinking about that." He produced a folder from his desk, placing it on the table. "I'm considering running for city council." The announcement was met with enthusiastic support, particularly from Thomas, who had long encouraged Douglas to consider public service. The construction industry needs advocates who understand sustainability and fair labor practices, Douglas explained. And after everything that happened, I want to help create systems that protect people from the Lawrence Shepherds of the world. Later, after everyone had left and the house was quiet, Douglas found himself in the basement, now renovated into a comfortable family room where Bradley sometimes invited friends to watch sports or where Melissa practiced with her band. No trace remained of that night a year ago, the moldy carpet and standing water long gone. Douglas's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Curiously, he opened it. 1 year ago today, you were on your knees in a flooded basement while your family laughed. Today you opened a youth center and are planning a council run. I've been tracking your progress, Douglas Mercer. Few men recover from total betrayal as completely as you have. Respect from a fellow survivor. M. Douglas stared at the message, wondering who had sent it. Then he remembered, Maya Cortez, one of Nolan's previous victims who had helped build the case against him. Douglas had spoken with her only briefly during the investigation, but her words had stayed with him. People like us either break or become unbreakable. He typed back, the best revenge is living well, and making sure they never hurt anyone else. Douglas set down his phone and looked around the transformed basement. 1 year ago, he had been the forgotten man, taken for granted, disrespected, betrayed by the people he'd sacrificed everything for. That man was gone now, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, less willing to be exploited. He hadn't forgiven those who betrayed him. Vanessa had received only what was legally required in the divorce, enough to start over, but not the windfall she'd planned on. She'd lost the luxury home, the premium credit cards, the easy access to Douglas's hard-earned money. She'd also lost her children's full-time presence, as both had chosen to live primarily with their father. Nolan Pierce was serving time in a federal prison, his scheme exposed, his charm rendered useless behind bars. Lawrence Shepard had lost another 15 years of his life to a revenge plot that had ultimately failed. As for Bradley and Melissa, Douglas had allowed them to earn back a place in his life, but the relationship was forever changed. Gone was the blind trust, the unconditional giving. In its place was something more honest. Respect that had to be earned, trust that had to be maintained through actions, not words. Douglas climbed the stairs from the basement, turning off the light behind him. He would never return to being the man who allowed himself to be treated as nothing more than an ATM with a pulse. That forgotten man was gone for good, and in his place stood someone who would never again be taken for granted. Outside, snow began to fall on Portland, covering the city in a clean white blanket. Douglas watched from his window as the past was slowly buried, one snowflake at a time. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.